We have reached the end of a very, very busy finale to the season, and quite a kind of hell of a coup, you know? So this year in rugby started with the World Cup, which was huge within France, and I think there are a lot of factors that kind of perhaps prevented it growing necessarily the sport in the way people might have hoped outside of France. Yeah. But being in France for that tournament, it was enormous. It was huge.
It was everywhere. You'd walk around every corner and you'd see Dupont, you'd see Antoine, you'd see Movaki, you'd see whoever, Cyril Bay, all on the walls.
This sticker book being given out just in a supermarket, you know, people handing out stickers when you spent enough in the supermarket. It was everywhere.
Yeah.
However, it has then concluded with another major event in France, being the Olympic Sevens at the Olympics.
Yes.
In the Stade de France. So we had the men's tournament first, we just had the women's. The women's has come to a conclusion. We had New Zealand winning gold. To firstly reflect on that a bit, I think overall New Zealand were the best and most complete team in that tournament.
Yeah.
And I think that feels fair, them to have won that medal. We talked about when we did this before the wrap up on the pool stage.
Boy, did that age, by the way.
By the time it went up.
Yeah.
Australia, I think, had the most talented squad.
Yeah.
But what we saw from them was them struggling to close out games, and they didn't quite know how to slow the game down.
It's a real shame that they came up short, because they were kind of the most aesthetically pleasing team to watch.
Yeah.
You know, maybe we slightly overhyped them, I don't know, but they were incredible. They looked like the full package, and then really lost their discipline in the last two games, which really, really cost them against teams who, as you say, you had to manage the game, you had to slow it down, you had to just frustrate Australia, and they were clearly frustrated in both the semi-final and the bronze final by the fact that they were made to look human, which they hadn't all tournament.
There was a knock on one of the players made, I forget who it was, in their own 22 in the semi-final against Canada, where Canada just had their own momentum. They hadn't had the ball at all, Australia. They finally get it from the restart. They sling it back, and a player knocks it on cold. And the frustration from every single player, not just normally the player that knocks it on looks frustrated themselves, and all the other players come over and pat them on the back and so on. And there's a look of everyone being like, oh God, I can't bear this.
Yeah.
You know? And they lost it from there. And I think that was it. I think this was a crucial learning experience for them. Where I think New Zealand were more complete, more composed team. A lot of that side had not just won gold at the previous Olympics, they'd gone and won the previous Rugby World Cup in between as well, the previous Women's World Cup in 2021. So you had a lot of players coming in, the likes of Harini, the likes of Waka, who had that experience and knew how to do that.
Look at Portia Woodman-Whitcliffe, for instance, has won 2 Sevens Rugby World Cups, has obviously got a couple of 15s Rugby World Cups as well, 2 gold medals, 1 silver medal, and that was her final kind of bowing out in rugby, right? And it's not a bad haul to have, obviously. But, you know, the level of experience they had coming in and just not knowing how to win games, but knowing how to win tournaments, you know, and there's a huge difference between those.
Yeah. However, I think the biggest moment for Sevens, for rugby in general, over this Olympic run was the bronze medal match, not the gold match.
Yeah.
And we saw Team USA, who I had mentioned in the previous one, you know, bronze medal contenders, led most notably by Alona Mar. And that entire team, you know, Naya Tapa as captain, who was absolutely brilliant, big servant for this team.
Another one retiring, age 29. But
29?
Yeah.
Wow.
What an incredible career she's had.
Olive Kelter, who's been brilliant for a long, long time. Christy Kirsch is another brilliant story, you know, kind of led in here. You've got these across the board, these brilliant, brilliant stories.
Above all, one of the players who's impressed me the most is Ariana Ramsey for the USA. She not only has jets, but she's so physical. And she's a player that I could really see. I mean, I kind of hope she stays in sevens because she's built for this game, clearly. But if she transferred to 15s, she would be unbelievable as a winger. And
so what we've seen is a group of characters and of athletes that have really captured the public's imagination.
Yeah.
And I think it's rare that you have fans not from America cheering for an American sports team, right?
Especially in rugby.
Yeah. Well, in rugby, they're often an underdog, right? And that adds something in.
It's true.
But it's pretty rare to have non-American fans at the Olympics cheering for an American team. Yeah. And yet people got behind them because this is such a great squad of characters, of people. They are portrayed incredibly well outside of the games they play themselves. And yet within them, you watch them, you can't help but get caught up. There's a reason that we've had like Michelle Obama, we've had Snoop Dogg, Flavor Flav, we've had, you know, athletes from across the board, the Serena Williams and so on of the world, coming and watching and supporting this team, right? And this has become one of the stories of the game so far, of the whole Olympics, is you go and look at NBC's women's sports page on Twitter, right? And the two things they're talking about are Simone Biles and Iona Meyer.
Yeah.
And those are the two things that are coming up and over again. They've become the stars, and she's become one of the big faces of the Olympics.
Yeah. And
she is everywhere. You look at American sports coverage, and suddenly rugby is on the map, right? And I went to look at, after the men's tournament, NBC, a bunch of like American papers, Washington Post, etc. And I think the Washington Post was the only one that ran a story on DuPont and on their French gold medal, because I was interested to see how in that crossover outside of kind of rugby circles. Because within France, that was enormous. And I think within the UK as well, we saw DuPont was the main story on the BBC coverage on the first day of the Olympics. They had a big section on, him and why he means so much in France.
Yeah.
And it's really grown him as a star
100%.
outside of rugby circles in the UK. However, outside of those rugby countries, people weren't going, who's this Antoine Dupont fella? They weren't that bothered.
Yeah.
This has cut through in a different way.
Yeah. It's really vindicating of Dupont's decision to go and play sevens, right, and to be an Olympian, because that has taken to another level of stardom. There are people who have not watched that much rugby but have heard of this guy and then goes, oh, but he's the star, know. And so all the commentators are talking about. So everyone in the crowd has Dupont 9 or Dupont 11 or Dupont 25 on the back of their shirts, and that's huge, right? Ilona Maher, much the same, has, since the Olympics started, gained 1.2 million Instagram followers. Wow. Since it started, that's like in a week, she's gained that many, I'll be honest, right? I wasn't one of the followers for a long time, right? I was quite late to the party. I was telling you about this. She was at I was very aware of her work, but
no, I remember I was
casual
this up of like me mentioning her. And you being like, the USA Sevens player, she's good. Yeah, she's good in the pit. And you had no idea about her Instagram following.
Yeah. And then I became aware of that. She was massive on TikTok and all of this. I wasn't too familiar with what she was actually doing. Yeah. And when she was on 800,000, I kind of went back and I had a spell of 2 hours where I was just constantly binging everything she's done, and she's amazing.
She's so funny.
But it's effortless. There's nothing self-indulgent about the way that she creates her content. It's just, she's just quite witty, It's not in the way that people go oh, she should be a comedian or whatever. She's no, she's quite witty. She's got a really good group of mates. She's evidently lovely, and she's unbelievable on the pitch.
She's got that movie star thing of you want to watch her,
Yeah.
Where you follow her, and even when she's done more serious TikToks or things that aren't funny, you're always engaged, and she's so charming, you're switched on to her, and she then carries that onto the pitch, and she has that kind of quite rare aura when she gets the ball. The moment she gets it, you're like, oh god, okay, it's happening, and you've got the sense in the crowd, right? And I think this would have happened regardless of her social media following. She would have become one of the stars of this Olympic Sevens, and what's happened is through her social media following, she's become one of the stars of the Olympics rather than just of the Rugby Sevens. And the way crowds were getting behind her when she got the ball, particularly in that quarter final, I think it really, really happened, where she was such a danger, that game against Great Britain. Her try came out of absolutely nowhere. And I'm aware that we're kind of focusing on one player, but she was amongst the real standouts for America. She's the player we'd be pulling out anyway as being the star. And so to have that player being the one with the brilliant social media following. Right?
Yeah, it's really important. And it's one thing I want to talk about on this actually is, so obviously the reason I think why sevens works much more in the Olympics than 15s is because if you've never seen it before, if you watch 15-a-side full contact rugby, you're thinking, that's bloody Eben Etzebeth, he's 6'11" and massive and whatever. This is really violent. You look over and the guy next to him is Oxenchair or Franz Maherbe or whatever, and you're looking and going God, these guys are terrifying, right? And that is such an important part of rugby. It's a part of why I love rugby, is that you have them on the same team with Faf de Klerk, who's this 5'5" nuisance who just loves pissing people off, right? However, in sevens, I think people won't just look at rugby and go like, oh, it's just some violent sport where people hit each other and try and get the ball over there. People will look at it and instead go, oh, so these are the basics of the game, right?
Yeah.
You've got to be balanced, you've got to be quick, you've got to be able to throw the ball a long way, you've got to be accurately catching it, you've got to make good decisions in terms of when to just run into people, when to run round people, you need to be able to kick the ball, you need to be accurately doing all these things, you've got to be extremely fit. And I think it really outlines the basics of 15-a-side rugby and makes them blatantly obvious, because if you're bad at any one of those skills in sevens, you get found out straight away, right? Yeah. And you can see all 7 of these players on every team have these in abundance, right? Male and female, there's not a blind spot on any of these players, right? And that's one thing. But the other thing I think is really interesting about this is in sevens, there's a lot more focus on the individual. Right? That you can score tries in sevens by having one good player on the pitch.
Yeah.
And obviously it's a team game. Does it send out the wrong message? A lot of people would say it does, right? And a lot of people will say in 15s when you try and make a superstar, oh, but it's all about the team. People say it about Dupont when people go on about him being like one of the greatest players of all time. People go, oh, but
tell me about it.
Yeah. But it is. It's mainly, gammons from England sat on the coach, having been in the game 40 years. And it's like, good for you. But also then they say like, but it's not about him, it's about the team. Or it's not about her, it's about the team. And the thing is, you are right. Obviously, you're right. Yeah. But I think in order to grow rugby and promote rugby, we have to look at, like, Michaela Blythe has been a genuine superstar in this, right? And met up with bloody Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce, right? Alona Maher we've talked about. Antoine Dupont is the biggest star in 15-a-side rugby, let alone sevens. We're looking at Madison Levi, who's been all over the place.
One of the best things about this Olympics is Madison Levi, who has been the standout player of the women's series the last year or two.
Yeah.
The most talented rugby athlete to come along in a long time, maybe since Dupont. Like, there's that argument to be made.
Yeah.
And
the best players to come out of Australia in such a long time, for sure.
Yeah. Certainly up there. And to see her becoming the level of superstar she should be.
Yeah.
And she now feels like a household name within rugby circles.
Yeah.
In a way she wasn't this time last week. She was for sevens nerds and for people that really follow women's rugby.
Yeah.
And now it's like people are like, oh God, no, she's unbelievable. She broke Portia Woodman's all-time record for tries scored in the Olympics, right? Portia Woodman's been to 3 Olympics. She's been to 1.
Yeah. And Portia Woodman, in case you didn't know, is the best try scorer I've maybe ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
Like, in terms of just doing that thing where you get the ball, you run in that direction, you put it down. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a player better at that. And Maddie Levi's broken that record. And that's not even her entire game. Like, her contact work and everything is so good.
The thing about sevens, right, is that if you have a star, it is underlined repeatedly.
Yeah.
Because Maddie Levi having the equivalent level of performance as she had in a sevens game, that results in her scoring 4 tries. If she has that equivalent game in 15, she's probably scoring 2 tries over 80 minutes, right? Instead, she scores 4 tries over 14 minutes. And that leads to you going, oh God, she's unbelievable. Yeah. And you underline her in a different way in your brain, right? And that builds out.
That really helps with digesting rugby, right? Is that you've got these players that you're like, that's the superstar, that's the individual that inspires me, that makes me want to watch this game, that makes this feel like a big deal, right? I just mentioned, Michaela Blythe, who was unbelievable, scored an absolute worldie in the final. Incredible feat on her. But Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce meeting up with her and watching her and celebrating her scoring a try. Incredible, because Fraser-Pryce is like one of the most legendary athletes the world has ever seen, right? Antoine Dupont getting Snoop Dogg commentating on him, as you were mentioning. Snoop Dogg saying, I want Dupont as my linebacker because bro's got gas, right? And that's not even the main part of Dupont's game. But Snoop Dogg doesn't know that. I'm not here to at you, Snoop Dogg, and go like, Snoop, when will you finally...
No, this is beef. This is beef. You're saying...
Snoop, my brother, when will you finally admit that he's like so good at hitting 50-22 off his left foot, which he did against England in the 24th minute in 2023? Like, come on, Snoop, how have you not seen that?
Where was he? Why wasn't he paying attention to that chase back in the Champions Cup final, winning the turnover?
Yeah.
Honestly, unbelievable.
I hope he watches the next episode.
Yeah, Dre would have respected that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's a huge part of this, is building those characters and building those stars. However, it also allows for upsets much easier.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that is a problem with 15s, with rugby union, is that, and I think it's also one of rugby's biggest strengths, is that 9 times out of 10, the team that deserves to win wins.
Yeah.
And if your team doesn't deserve to win and if your team deserves to win and loses, it's almost always because you've made an error that cost you the game.
Yeah.
Or the opposition does something absolutely brilliant in what was otherwise quite an even match.
Yeah.
And so that's why upsets like Japan beating South Africa in 2015 are so rare, because it takes that level of 3 years of Eddie Jones as their coach, preparing them for that particular game and building everything on how we beat this one team.
Yeah.
And it takes that level of preparation to get an underdog to that level in rugby union. Because, the nature of the game, the forward-based nature, the fatigue it sets in, everything else, it tends to give you a fair reflection of the match as a scoreboard. Sevens can be a bit more random, and it can be one breakaway leads to you losing the game.
Yeah.
And therefore, it creates more upsets, right? And
That's
it's
essentially
really
what happened in the third place game.
Yeah, it's something that really works about football, and it's a big part of why football is the biggest sport in the world, right? Or soccer, because it allows for randomness, and in some ways that's sometimes unsatisfying if you're, a fan or if you're someone that enjoys breaking down why a team is good. However, it does lead to great results and great drama, and ultimately, sport's always about drama.
Yeah.
And sevens gives you that. It gives you that element of added randomness that sometimes comes in. So you have China, I think, very much grew performance by performance from having a few moments fall like that against Fiji. And then they turn that into an absolute slaughtering. And from there, go on to win other games, including beating GB in their final game.
Yeah. Perfect example of what you're just on about with that moment where either Norman Bell throws the ball into touch and costs GB the game, having had a brilliant tournament herself. You're right about China, the amount of momentum that they managed to build. I mean, I've heard Claire Thomas say on commentary that before the Olympics they hadn't lost a game since January, which is mad on the Challenger Series that we're playing on. But still, as you say, that is an underdog to rugby audiences.
And it's also an interesting other growth unit for the sport, right? Because we've got the USA here, we've got Canada as well, who have been an absolute mess.
Yeah.
Canadian rugby's been such a state. We talked about it on a previous one on this channel. We want to do more on the main channel.
Yeah.
However, having the women, be as good as they are in 15s and beating the Black Ferns early this year, and now making a final against the Black Ferns in the Olympic Sevens and winning that silver medal is enormous.
Yeah.
And it suggests, I think, World Rugby has done an awful lot of chasing America in general. And I think it's interesting adding China to this conversation as well, because the men's team is not up to the same standard.
No.
But the women's team is very tidy and have got something for the sevens. And it's unlikely they'll commit much money 15s-wise because, almost all sports funding in China goes to Olympic events. It's just how it works there. The priority is the Olympics. So there is going to be money set aside for the sevens, especially seeing these results now with them overperforming. They can potentially kick on, and the women's team can kick on. Probably isn't going to happen with 15s there. However, it can happen on both sides for Canada and the USA, and in sevens for China.
But on the flip side of that, if they reach a point where they reach their winning gold in sevens, they're going to get more funding for their 15s team.
Yeah, they can invest it both ways.
Yeah.
And they can take those athletes over.
Yeah.
However, what we've seen is World Rugby investing an awful lot of money, an awful lot of time and resources, and giving the World Cup, or both World Cups, to the USA, and then having Canada kind of on the side there, right? And what we've got is 3 massive nations here who actually, the route is to get them into women's rugby, because there was an enormous logjam in men's rugby, or men's sport rather, in America in general. You are not breaking it. It's the most saturated market in the world, the American sports market, right? Soccer is a 5th place position by a long way, and that's taken about 30 years of much more money and much more effort coming from a much stronger standing in the first place. The more Americans know the rules of football easily, or soccer easily, because they see it on TV, they see it all around, and it's easy to understand. Yeah. Rugby is not going to have that. However, there are numerous players over both the American and Canadian teams. I believe Charity Williams was like this. Who was it? Curtie Chris was like this. I'm sure there's more as well. Olive Kelter, who wanted to play American football, but that wasn't available. But there was a rugby team they could join.
Yeah.
And so they went there. And there is a gap in the market there. And it's why Canadian women's rugby has always profited so much, because a disproportionate number of the best contact athletes go to play rugby, right? Where for the men, they go and play Canadian rules football, they go and play American football, they go and play ice hockey, they go and play a wider variety of sports where Canadian rugby or women's rugby in Canada could hoover up a lot of the best athletes.
Yeah.
And that same opportunity is open here for the USA, for China, and for Canada.
And that kind of brings me on to my next point, because the crowds that they've got in have been massive.
Yes.
Right? We've had a couple of record-breaking crowds for women's rugby ever, of all time. Any form of women's rugby, any women's rugby event with 9,000 people turning up on 2 of the days, and just short of that on another one of the
67
days.
on the other, yeah.
Yeah, which is a bloody good effort.
Yeah.
You know, over 200,000 people combined between all of those days-ish. However, a big part of that comes down to, right, the Olympics is great in that it puts equal weighting on men's and women's sport.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
You get the same calibre of prize for winning in the men as you do winning in the women's, right? And look, I remember seeing somebody kind of ironically suggesting on Twitter that the Six Nations should do this and give a joint title out to whoever gets the most combined points in the men's and the women's. I can see why they've not done that. However, I do think that's actually a really good idea.
I think there's a third trophy to be added in.
Yeah.
You don't devalue either of the ones you have.
Yeah.
But there's an additional prize, perhaps even just a monetary prize, you know? You just have like a photo op with the captains of both the teams.
Yeah.
And you then give out a prize on top of funding.
Yeah.
Because we all forget how big the prize money is in the Six Nations, you know?
Yeah.
And surely a Women's Rugby Championship has to follow as well. That feels like something they're very much behind the times on, is not having that up and running. But yeah, that would be a fantastic just extra carrot, because it forces people to have that opinion and step in.
Because I think more important than the numbers of people in the crowds, because I think that's obviously brilliant, and I think that we're reaching a point where that felt quite normal this weekend. It's like, well, it's the Olympics. Of course people are going to be there. And rugby's massive in France. Of course people are going to be there. It didn't feel like that big a deal, and that's a good thing. Like, but what's more important than that was when you look at and listen to the crowd themselves, listen to them singing, like how behind France they were, as well as like people who were there as other nations, supporters and so on. But like, I just remember at one point during one of France's games, looking and just seeing like a group of young teenage lads like absolutely on their feet, bouncing up and down for France. And just, I don't know, maybe it's because we're old, but like, I feel like when we were at that age, there would have been people going like, I don't care as much because it's the women, you know? And that sucks, obviously. And naturally, there will be some people who have watched men's rugby more, who know the players better. There's the Dupont factor, which made me support the French men's team more than support the French women's team, obviously. And a lot of people would be the same. That's completely fine. That's not a problem. However, the French people in there, you know, when they're, you know, drinking their pints or like bouncing up and down, listening to tunes with their mates or whatever at the sevens, they were just as into it for the women, which is great. And they're going to come back and watch that again. It's normal.
Yeah, that's a starting point, isn't it? It's a real starting point to get into this. And you almost wish this wasn't, and I'm very glad it's coming at the end of the season because it's been a very long season. This wasn't coming right at the end of the season because there's so much you can dive into and go like, no, this is the next thing. This is where you hit this now. Where instead, right, what happens is probably a lot of these rugby fans who've now discovered it in the last week, and this is amazing, is they go and they watch handball in a few days' time and they go, this is amazing. Or they watch the skateboarding or they watch whatever in the Olympics and they go, this is brilliant, I love this. And then rugby sits in the back of their mind until it comes up again, right? And one thing we've got is the fact that this is the first time I think that having 2 World Cups in America has felt like it is a profitable idea. Because for a long time I've said that, you know, I've said repeatedly, like the better approach is to split that money over a lot of nations and try and grow more countries that want to play the game, rather than investing all of it in one nation where you can be the 6th biggest. And you can try and aim for more countries where you can be the 2nd biggest sport. You know, there's a lot of countries where you can do what they've done for Uruguay over the last decade, where rugby has gone from being like the 5th or 6th biggest sport to the 2nd biggest sport. And it's a long way behind football, but it's still the 2nd biggest sport in the country. Right, and it now has a built-in fan base, and they're selling out test matches to go and see their national team play, and they have a hugely increased number of people watching. And you can, for much less money, get the likes of Uruguay and Chile, and even a lot of the European countries, who have one really entrenched sport, but the others are slightly further down, back playing rugby. And I think, actually, the USA looks like a solid idea if you can follow this momentum. And you've now got a lot of people who probably never watched rugby before, who have looked at the last few days and gone, oh, this is great. And I've seen a lot of it on social media, people sharing clips and, you know, things actually staying up rather than being taken down like they were in the bloody World Cup.
We'll get on to this.
And we look at the the crowds, you say, and that adds so much, right?
Yeah.
And I loved watching Rio 2016 in particular, but partly because there was a small crowd, there's a lot of us watching it online and kind of following it. It felt like a big like cult moment, you know, of Sevens being taken seriously and it's really involving, and it feeling like as big rugby fans, we were getting to play on a bigger stage and go like, yeah, look at us, this is our day. This felt completely different.
Yeah.
This felt like the world coming in and joining us in the club.
Yeah, and that was the first time that rugby was on the map in that sense, that people wanted to come over and give it a go so they could go to the Olympics, you know,
Yeah.
which is as good and legit a reason to give
Yeah,
rugby
yeah.
a go, you know, if you're Carlin Isles or whoever, and you're not quite made the cut as a sprinter or whatever other sport people may have tried and then come over to rugby sevens. Now it feels a lot more, again, normal.
Yeah.
Like these athletes have been playing for a long time, and it's just a part of rugby sevens now.
And like looking at friend of the channel, Ali Donnelly of Scrum Queens, who once asked me to said she'd send me a copy of the book to put in in one of these videos.
Nice.
And I said I already own one. It's sat in the background. You just never see it. Here it is.
Legend, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, talking about how emotional she was being at the finals day. You know, of how big that was, having been to Sevens events and been to women's rugby back when the crowd was 30 people and a dog, and the dog didn't even get on the pitch, which is bullshit. One thing this weekend's really, really missed. But seeing that growth and that step up, and this weekend for the men felt like a big moment in Antoine Dupont's career.
Yeah.
It felt like we were watching a historic moment for one of the greats, and a moment we'll talk about in decades to come when we look up back on the career of one
Which
of the
is
best
subsequently
players ever.
big for rugby, by the way.
Yeah. Because I don't think we've had a star of his size since Lomu. Maybe Wilkinson, but
Yeah.
you know, someone that can cross over internationally. Where for the women, this felt like a watershed moment. And we talked about this bit with the Women's Six Nations, that didn't feel like it stepped up significantly from the previous year. In the way the last few Women's Six Nations have each been bigger and bigger and bigger.
But again, this is normalising.
Yeah.
Like,
And I think what we've had here instead is it's come in the Olympics.
Yeah.
Is that huge moment of actually, this is big.
Yeah.
And a lot of these athletes are being looked at in a completely different way. And it builds really nicely for the World Cup next year.
and on top of that, right, to go back to the USA briefly, that they have managed to, by scoring a bronze medal, they've simultaneously scored a $4 million investment
Yes.
in women's rugby
Yeah.
in America, which is monumental. For men's rugby, that would be big in America, right? Obviously, aside from what World Rugby do for them, you know, like having that to boost the USA Rugby Board is pretty damn big, right? But for women's rugby, where there's like, you know, obviously, at the moment, there's not massive amounts of money in it, right?
Yeah.
That a lot of club teams, certainly in this part of the world, aren't fully pro. You know, that we're looking at semi-pro systems where the international players are mainly professional, right? But with that, in America in particular, that's absolutely massive.
Yeah. I mean, that is, I believe I'm right in saying, apologies if I'm not, don't sue me, significantly larger than any of the European nations spend, maybe other than England, yeah, spend on women's rugby in a year, you know.
There's a little bit of me that's salty because it's like, why couldn't it be Wales? Why can't Wales?
Where's that Welsh billionaire that can randomly
Yeah.
drop 4 million?
And again, like I find
But it
myself
was-
all the
it was
time
a-
like cheering for Ireland in the sevens and going like, I don't want you to be as good as Wales.
But this is it. So there was the if I said that, I'd have people at me for months. But
I'm biased towards the Welsh women's team. Sue me.
it was a multimillionaire who owns a women's Major League Soccer team.
Yeah.
And is a big investor in women's sport. Saw rugby for the first time over this Olympics and decided to invest 4 million of her own money. And that is enormous. And it is those sort of opportunities, and those only grow, right? You imagine how many brands are currently lining up to do deals with Ma. How many are looking at other members of that Olympic team, you know?
Because the product's good.
Yeah.
We know that for a fact.
Yeah.
We just need the right people to see it.
Yeah. And suddenly, the level of endorsement and the level of money going into that sport is going to be huge, allowing for greater professionalism, allowing for more competitive teams. The USA 15s team has dropped off in the last few years on the women's side. They are not perhaps the force they once were. You know, we've seen them lose to Wales for the first time ever last year. You know, a few of those over, like, you know, Scotland as well, beating them. Like, it's not perhaps the fourth or fifth best team in the world, which they've been. They've
They've got a tough trip to WXV1 this
Yeah.
autumn as well. which could be some really rough results for them. I want to be proven wrong on that.
Yeah.
But
this investment might let them rebuild a bit ahead of next year. You saw what Wales investing money a year before World Cup did, and it was a lot less than this for their chance at that tournament, where they became quarterfinalists for the first time ever, had their second best World Cup ever, and there's a very decent chance that if invested wisely, the USA can use this to have a competitive team at the next World Cup, and then when they come to host 4 years afterwards, being a proper side who can contend for a title, perhaps even bronze again.
Yeah. So, briefly change subject.
Yep.
Okay. Earlier, you spoke about viral clips, right? And I think it's important that we talk about this because there was an outstanding clip of Erin King of Ireland holding up Emily Lane, going for a kick-off. Lane's body weight tips her all the way over. I'm sure everyone's seen it. King manages to hold her up and just using basically her forearms, manages to get her back down to terra firma safely, right? That clip has gone genuinely viral. Not just in the sense of like in rugby, usually something gets like a couple of thousand likes, you're like, oh, that went viral, that's massive. But it's gone like in the sporting world, like wrestling fans are sharing it,
Well, look, so my DuPont tweet did 17,000 people liked it, right? Which is
not that you were checking, but yeah.
No, but it's absurd, and it's hard not to be when it's hitting that number.
No, sure. It's a lot of notifications.
When I went
annoying.
to check my phone, you know how like Twitter taps out at 20 notifications? It would hit 20 notifications inside a minute. And it was a nightmare the whole weekend.
You're popular though.
Thank you. I am so popular.
It was all like link in bio.
Yeah. Every single one. However, right.
I'm surprised there's none of those bots that were like, oh, I'm better than DuPont. He went round my house one time and I showed him a good time. You know those bots that come up on Twitter all the time?
Yeah.
None of those.
None of those. I'm pretty sure there were a few bots in amongst them.
Okay.
People being like, he is not good. Thumbs up.
He is Jack.
Yeah. But a friend of the channel, Jamie Wall, shared a clip of Jasmine Joyce Butcher's incredible hit on Mar.
Yeah.
Brilliant tackle. One of the best moments of the quarterfinal round at least, but of the whole tournament as well for me. Jazz Joyce here. And that did I think 15, 16,000 people liked it. It's more focusing on the lady popping up afterwards and pulling an outraged face in the background.
Yes.
But, so that clip went enormous numbers. It keeps happening across this whole games. There was another clip of Portia Woodman-Whitcliffe scoring a bunch of outrageous tries, which again was doing huge numbers.
She's broken America, hasn't she? Yeah.
The ridiculous Brazil try, Suarez scoring in the final play against Fiji, which again...
got over 1 million views, didn't it?
Yeah. Brazilian woman shared it, just a non-rugby fan, non-sports fan, someone with only 1,000 odd followers, and yet it just caught fire, and that, 20 odd thousand people liking that.
Yeah.
And then you go to TikTok, where again, a lot of this is happening again. And I'm not on TikTok beyond making an account briefly because someone was posting racist impersonations of me, which is a whole other thing. Not racist in the race against the Welsh. They were just like, they were posting racist things under my name. But from everything you look at, it's enormous the way rugby clips are spreading. And you compare that to the 2023 Rugby World Cup when everything was getting taken down, as we know very much to our chagrin.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I want to talk about. So that's had a couple of million views on it, that clip of King lifting Lane up, which is brilliant because that is an incredible skill, which not many sports will need you to just be able to do that on the off chance that something like that, freak occurrence like that randomly happens.
Yeah.
And it has happened in rugby before, obviously.
There's the famous clip of the Beast.
The Beast doing it before. I have seen a couple of South African fans getting mad that people are sharing that and going like, oh no, the Beast did this years ago. It's like, I know, we're not here to do that down. Anyway, what is really important is that clip has just been shared by a fan who just liked it and thought, this is cool, don't watch much rugby, but this is great. And people have shared this gone like, oh my God, this is incredible. These athletes are amazing. Also, I'd like the fact that obviously some people are, but nobody's really making a big deal out of the fact that it happened in the women's game. Yeah. I've seen a couple of places sharing it, trying to clickbait it about that. But ultimately, it's just this is what rugby players are like. Rugby sevens players in particular are good at this, they're able to do this, and front five forwards in rugby union. But yeah, the fact that this was not posted by a governing body, like by an official account of any sort, this wasn't posted by somebody with any kind of sway in like the copyright lawyers kind of thing. This was just posted by somebody who just thought, this is a really cool clip, I need to share this, right? Yeah. And it wasn't taken down, which is a really good thing, really encouraging, because ultimately, people see enough of like what corporate accounts share, you know?
Yeah.
And it's something that a lot of governing bodies in rugby have been guilty of before, is going, and as you say, we've suffered this firsthand, is going, what, you're trying to promote our game in a way that we don't get all of the profits from. It's like, no, you will get the profits from it, because the game will grow as a consequence of this one clip being shared far and wide. More people will watch the rugby in future, and you will then get the profits further down the line. Like, don't worry about it, but more people will see it this way. Yeah. Like, more people will engage with, like, some randomer going like, yo, this is insane, rather than, World Rugby going, look at this brilliant clip of Erin King holding this up. What a great show of athleticism, Like, it's just the way that social media works, especially with TikTok nowadays. It's how it works, what people engage with well.
Absolutely,
and also, if World Rugby shared it saying like, yo, this is insane, people would go cringe.
Exactly.
It's just, I'm sorry, it's just the way it works.
That is world class.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Got roasted because it was just him patting a ball in the field.
And that was the only clip we saw of the World Cup.
Mental, innit?
Yeah. But it is enormous for allowing people to see the sport, right? Allowing people to see the sport allows them to see the sport. Yeah. And it's all well and good there being official channels sharing things, right? They go out to the people that follow.
That is also essential, I will say. It is also essential, and like, I think the stuff that like Rugby Pass share and so on is really good for the game, that they share these clips and go, isn't this amazing? Because the more people see of rugby, the better. Yeah, right? Absolutely. It's essential as well.
And again, it's the thing I think like with this channel is hopefully deepening affection and love of people who are already in, right? But it's quite hard with what we do to grow that. And what you need is people getting new eyes on and approaching it in a new way. And that happens through people engaging directly with players, for a lot of that coming in, and seeing it reach different environments. And seeing, again, I have seen a few people that I follow from the non-Squid Rugby account that are not rugby fans at all, responding and replying to that, I had a friend send me a thread from a lesbian subreddit of who are you thirsting over the most in the Olympics, and a lot of rugby players on there, and a huge debate over the fact that Ilona Maher isn't gay. Like, there were so many people upset over that.
She's in the villa, man.
I know. But again, like, a lot of that's a key part of it. That's a key audience.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a niche audience to what a lot of people associate with rugby fans, but that's great. You're more than
Caroline Drouin came up a few times.
Interesting. Yeah. I had a friend who doesn't watch much rugby the other day message me saying, I didn't know America had a rugby team. And it's like, firstly, great that you've seen that. That's clearly unavoidable enough that you've spotted that. And then his next question was, do they have a men's team as well? And I was like, they do.
Let me introduce you to my Lord and Saviour, AJ McGinty.
Yes, yeah, and I did actually explain AJ McGinty to him on the spot. But
what did you say? How do you explain AJ McGinty on the spot?
Well, basically, he was saying like, are they all actual rugby players or are they mainly like rejects from other sports? And I was like, there's a bit of both. You do have a lot of players who kind of played college
American
football.
Raptors, man.
Yeah, exactly. But you do have a lot of players who played like college football or basketball or whatever who then come over. And there's a few imports, such as their best player, AJ McGinty, who's Irish, right? But he was also American. That's not me going like, oh, he shouldn't play for him. But like, he went to Blackrock College.
Yeah.
And I love that he plays for the USA, I will say. And I love AJ McGinty. I think he's a brilliant player. But anyway, I found that quite funny, him saying like, do they have a men's team? And it's just like, look, does anyone have a men's team? Wales don't. But
I wish they didn't.
Yeah.
It's the biggest mistake anyone ever made.
I love it when people are more ignorant towards men's rugby and treat women's rugby as a priority, is my point. Yeah. But that's irrelevant, that's by the by.
I think we've walked around in circles a lot. This has been a lot of like two people agreeing with each other aggressively. However, right, the key points I think are this has been a huge tournament for women's rugby. Yeah. I think it's been a good tournament for men's rugby, but it's been enormous, the later stages in particular, for the growth of women's rugby, for the spread of it. And what we've got to do is find ways to tap into this for the Women's World Cup next year.
Yes.
Because the key things you've got to bear in mind, right, are how do you get this USA team in front of the right pairs of eyes?
Yeah.
And that is going to be difficult I don't know who has the. I mean, they haven't announced any of the hosting. You know, we're led to believe it's going to be the BBC is going to have it in the UK. NBC had the Men's World Cup last year. If they've got it again, just they have the Olympic coverage. You've got to hope they push it.
Yeah.
Because they can go, we've got a proper product we can sell here, right? And if Mar doesn't convert, go over and play 15s, use her as your face of your commentary, face of your coverage.
Yeah.
Have her there, have her at
Just
every
go
game.
around interviewing people.
Yeah.
Like, look at how unavoidable Ruby Tui was for a couple of years.
Yeah.
You know, that was a good thing because we love Ruby Tui. Everyone who's watched women's rugby loves Ruby Tui, right? And again, she slightly transcended the boundary into men's rugby. You know, people learned her name. Again, like in Wales, the nearest example is Jasmine Joyce. You know, people saw her at the Olympics, and suddenly, there we go, Super Jazz. Fans of men's rugby would stick on the women's game and go give it to Jazz.
Yeah.
Because that was the only player they knew, and that's fine. You're watching. You know, you're learning.
I think women's rugby, more than men's rugby, frankly, needs these stars to grow.
Yeah.
Because the thing about men's rugby, right, is that we have 10 to 15 teams who are so deeply entrenched in countless families' DNA, right? Yeah. And we're a product of that. We are here doing this because our family watches the Welsh rugby team, and that has been going back for generation upon generation. It's a disease, right? And that isn't the case with women's rugby. There are far fewer families who've gone, well, we always watch the women's game, right? Yeah. And so you need to be drawn in because you already have the affiliation to a team. You already know what team you're going to support. Yeah. It's not that you've got to be drawn in and pick a side or anything. It's not like getting interested in the NFL or the Premier League or something, right? What you need is to be drawn in and to go, oh, I really like Jazz Joyce, I know she's good, means that you will watch the women's game when they're on, right? And it probably starts with you going, oh, they're on right now, I might as well watch that, you know, let's see how Jazz is playing. And then it becomes, oh, I'll watch it the following week and see how Jazz goes.
It becomes crippling depression because you put all of your emotional investment into them winning, and then they get the wooden spoon.
And then it just disappears, and you spend 4 years staring into the darkness.
Rugby's great.
But the thing is, right, that then works beyond where if you have no idea who these players are, and yet you go, I love Olive Kelter. Yeah. I really like her. I'm going to turn up and watch her again. And you follow her on social media, right? And the thing Sevens players are great at is because each round of the Sevens tournament is at a destination, right? Their social media becomes full of, here's what it's like in Hong Kong, here's what it's like in Dubai, here's what it's like in London, in Vancouver, Madrid, wherever the Sevens is that weekend.
On the cardboard beds.
Yeah, exactly. That all takes off. That's another thing as well. Bloody Piper Logan has been fantastic as well, also on social media. Her cardboard beds content, and is brilliant all tournament long, but that's a whole other thing. But yeah, the Sevens allows you to then go like, oh, it's on there. And especially for all being on Rugby Pass as well, so you've got to download one app and you've got access to it, which has been useful as well. Where, you know, if you're trying to get into men's rugby, into 15s rather, and say, you know, you start following Sia Khaleesi, and every week he's playing, you know, a ULC or now a top 14 game, and he's in a different town in France, it's less exciting, you know.
He's at Parc des Scarlets.
Yeah, he isn't sharing the footage in the same way, you know. You commit to a Jazz Joyce type figure, and like, oh, they're playing at Bristol this weekend, right? That's less exciting. Sure. But, you know, they're not necessarily sharing that content and making that content. Another part of the Sevens thing. We've talked around this a lot.
We have.
One thing that is left to do before we finish, unless you've got anything else to add.
No.
Is we need to do our 7 of the tournament.
Yeah.
Picked off the top of our heads, almost at random.
Not in positions, just 7 stars of the tournament.
Just 7 stars of the tournament who stand out, who come to mind almost immediately.
Yeah.
And I think in the same way we put Antoine Dupont on the bench for the men, I think we take Mar as a given. Yeah. And add her in. She's on the sideline with her camera, saying incredibly funny things alongside that we could never hope to live up to.
And she probably would have made the team anyway.
She absolutely would have been in the team anyway. But I'm giving it to her as a bonus so we can pick other names. That
I'm going to start with a hot take. Okay. Michaela Blyde. What a rugby player.
Michaela Blyde. Oh, man. Serafina Okemba of France has been absolutely phenomenal. Just properly dangerous every time she touches the ball.
Yeah. Charity Williams.
Oh man, that's going to be my next one.
What a player. Gas on her, balance on her, complete rugby player.
I'm going to take another Canadian though in Piper Logan, who I think has been the other standout for Canada.
Richly agree with that.
Just cheeky in the way she finds gaps constantly.
Yeah. Madison Levi.
I know. I thought we might get the whole thing about saying it.
Yeah, I know that Australia didn't do brilliantly in the final kind of like rounds, but she's in there.
How many are we up to? 5?
Yeah, thereabouts.
Yeah, they're about okay. We can
keep
keep going. Stacey Wacker of New Zealand,
my next pick.
The brother of the greatest rugby player second greatest rugby player in history, and yet, wait a minute, no, her brother is the second greatest rugby player in history, and yet she might be first. She might be the S rank above the A that is Jason Petrarls. So poor Tom Haberfield, Kieran Williams, greatest rugby players in history. But no, she's brilliant. The way she just finds space, she's so composed in everything she does. She's always
the most natural rugby player I've ever seen, basically.
Yeah, she's right up there.
Yeah.
She's always alive in the game.
Yeah.
Like there's almost never a moment where she isn't an option if she doesn't have the ball herself. She's just always involved and always there. You watch her...
Big game player as well.
Yeah.
Does not go quiet in the big games.
Her try in the final, the way she repeatedly gets back on side and gets back involved, so she's always an option, so there's always an extra player for the Canadians to be watching. She's just like, demonstrates so much of a game, and the rest of it you can get from just watching her with the ball.
It's so tempting in that try to either like take it in or kick it away or whatever.
Yeah.
You know? And instead she stays alive and they manage to turn it into a try scoring opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm going to back that up. I would have said 24 hours ago, I'd have said Faith Nathan, right?
Okay, yeah.
But instead, I'm going to flip that on its head and go for Georgia Miller. She's ludicrous.
Superb.
Just pops up in all the right places at the right times. Her sidestep is outstanding. Piston fend as well. Unbelievably strong, quick. Just like can kick really well, pass really well. There is not a problem in her game. And I think she's kind of the epitome of this New Zealand side with how she's played.
I'm going to take... We're just going now. We're just doing
all right,
this.
we'll do a bench.
Just doing this, yeah. Wang Wenyu of China.
Mate.
Such a great finisher. I think you can throw a few other Chinese in alongside, but like, I think she uses the ball better than a lot of her players in this tournament. Took both her tries, and she scored more than that, incredibly well. I thought was fantastic. Yeah.
That sounds good. Do we leave it there, or do you want one more?
Should we do one more each?
Super Jazz Joyce.
Jazz Joyce.
She was just brilliant in a GB team that sometimes struggled, but when they needed a big moment, she came up with it, and she nailed Ilona Maher.
Yeah.
Which was amazing.
I think Nadia Rue's very good for South Africa, just to mention one from that team, because we've sort of got through most of the others covering them. We haven't mentioned the Fijian, but the thing is, Donu, mate, great player.
Yeah.
Or Japanese player. Also want to mention Grise quickly, of France, just so dangerous. Obviously goes back and forth between 15s and 7s, and equally dangerous in both. However, right, I want to round out by doing just all the comments suggest and coming to Brazil.
Oh, hello.
And this Brazilian team was so much fun to watch. They are just pure gas. The Costas across the board, superb. So much gas. But then you have, Marcelo Suarez, scored that winning try. Utterly ridiculous. Yasmin Soares, not a sister, who's also in the squad. I think ultimately I'm going to go for Costa. I think as a Brazilian representative.
I like it.
But I greatly enjoyed watching this Brazil team. And they're a team that there might not be much more to the game, but they can spring a try out of absolutely nowhere.
Hell yeah, they can.
So, fantastic to watch.
Yeah, love it. Good tournament. We originally said that we were enjoying the men's more. Then the women's came up with an incredible final day. We just love rugby.
Yeah, I think the pool stage of the men's tournament was much stronger.
Yeah.
In that there were far fewer blowouts. But the knockouts of both were fantastic.
Yeah, and that's a perfect note to end on, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
GG
thank you very
Rugby
much.
Sevens.
The Sevens is over. The season is goddamn over.
Yeah.
10 days till the Rugby Championship starts.
Oh dear. There's a whole 8 more players on the pitch there. So weird.
Why would they do that?
Games are so long as well.
We should get rid of the teams with Billy 12 shoes.
Done.